We do sometimes call some of these in the sequence here, the hard sayings of Jesus. These are strong statements, challenges, insisting that being a disciple of Jesus Christ will come at a cost. It's not a warm bath. It's not the best way to make friends in a society like ours or to get promotions. It will have a cost. We had Mother Teresa's feast during the week, and she's probably one of those few people who can say she'd given up all her possessions. She had a sari that she probably thought she'd borrowed, and that was it. Most of us have lots of possessions. Even Jesuits have too many books. The trick, of course, is to have possessions and not let them have us. And the only way we can do that is if we know the right order of love in our lives. If we make a foundation, as Jesus is saying here in the Gospel, of the Father's love, of the Trinity's love for us. If that's the foundation, the first principle, if you like, of our lives, then everything else can surely be loved, but only in relation to that higher love. And to the extent that things draw us closer to that higher love, or draw us away from it, is their value. And sometimes we just need to let things go that can get in the way of that greatest love. Today in Rome, by now, 2 new saints have been made by the Church. Pope Leo's canonised Carlo Acutis, who died at 15 in about 2001, and Giorgio Frassati, who died in his 20s in the 1920s. He was born about 1901, so I think he was dead by 1925. 2 very young saints. Both, despite what the world told them to do at that age, devoted themselves radically, completely, and cheerfully to following Jesus Christ. When you're young and you have less possessions, it's easier. Generally in life, it's easier the less you have, in a way, spiritually. These 2 young men gave themselves to Jesus Christ, despite both of them dying young of diseases. Giorgio picked up, I think, a disease from those he was caring for, both Italian, in the city. Giorgio Frassati came from a very wealthy Italian, very influential family. His father was a politician. And when the family would go off to their summer, no doubt beautiful home, he would say, if everyone leaves the city in the summer, who will care for the poor? So he would stay back. He was also an avid mountain climber, and Pope John Paul II said when he was a young man, he looked up to Frassati. He read his writings as part of the movement then that was fairly early of the Church's social teaching. Frassati was a great advocate for Rerum Novarum, which was a hot-off-the-presses encyclical insisting on the rights of workers. John Paul II read this and was so impressed, he was very impressed, he said, by the fact that Frassati was a mountain climber, as JP2 was too. Giorgio would take his friends and others on these treks up mountains and have spiritual conversation with them. So the higher they went, the deeper the conversation would go. These 2 young saints the Church remembers today. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, as you get older, to think young people could make that radical choice so early with so much, if you like, promise in both cases. Carlo was clever with computers. He's the patron saint of the internet, by the way, and I think we can all agree it needs one. Carlo set up a website for Eucharistic miracles, not exactly every teenager's hobby. And then he got terribly sick. And his only concern was for those around him, that they might have joy that he was going. He believed the promises of Christ. He believed in the promises of this sacrament we're part of today, that eternal joy and peace are on offer for those who say yes to God's love. He wanted his parents to believe that and not to weep as sorrowfully. When we look at such lives, we can be a bit like Paul, writing as the old man. He's found a spiritual son, and he wants him to be received into that community. But he's not forcing things. He's learned by now that probably doesn't always work. He's inviting, he's offering, he's praying in that spirit of love that binds Christians, that we hopefully exchange with each other. He's asking for that, to be able to see with the freedom to rejoice in the young and pray that they discover what most of us take a lot longer to learn. That life is not about what we own, money, power, the honour of others. It's about how much we've given away, how much freedom we have interiorly, so that we can be free on mission exteriorly for the Lord, in our own small ways. And both of these young saints did act in saintly ways, in small ways. They were good friends. They did what they could in their sphere of influence. They weren't crushed, if you like, by the weight of the world's problems. Nor did they spend their youth frivolously doing what the world tells them they should do, being hedonistic, getting it back to front. No, through God's grace and their own active choice, they put Christ first. And now we're still bearing the fruit of them. One of the most important things for the church when someone proposes a person for beatification or sainthood is that there be a popular devotion amongst God's faithful to that person. And in both cases it sprang up immediately on their death. So we can be part of that. I think it's harder than ever to be young at the moment, it seems. When I was in Boston College for a while, this old professor told me a disturbing anecdote. So for about 30 years he'd been teaching this course on Introduction to Philosophy. And as you might expect, the Introduction to Philosophy is a lot of the questions are around what's real, what's not real, how do you know things, and Plato's cave to Descartes' evil demon. This becomes a question, what if you're being tricked? What if what you think is real is not real? Anyway, he'd always have a little straw poll to start, kick things off, and he'd say to these fresh-faced young college kids, if you had a choice to live in a simulation where you never suffered, you had everything you wanted, but it was exactly the same as what real life, but full of joy. If you had that choice versus the other option, having real life, reality, with all of the risk and the hurt, the pain that can go with that, and the love, which would you choose? He said when he started, there'd just be one cheeky kid who put his hand up on the simulation, just to annoy the professor. He said, now, half, maybe a bit more, say, simulation, please. I think that's terribly sad, and so did he. Even reality itself, leave aside the God who's the source of all creation, but just reality itself is less and less attractive. And more than ever, it's possible to live in a kind of simulation, and that'll just get more and more the case. To opt out of touch, even. To simulate love. To talk to a AI creature more than humans. Now that sounds sad, but like I said, we now have a saint for the internet. And hopefully young people around the world and be inspired to dream and love the way these two young men did, to return the love that emanates from the cross, to love the way we are loved by our God, who weeps for us, who wants nothing more than for you and I to turn to him and say yes to that love.